Just a reminder, today's conference is being recorded.
Good day, everyone. The American Society of Safety Engineers is pleased to present this virtual classroom session entitled Safety is Free because Culture is the Key. My name is Eric. I will be your moderator for this session. Please note that today's call is being recorded and all participant lines will be muted during this broadcast. If you need assistance at any time today, please email ASSE Virtual Classroom at compartners.com. This session will last 90 minutes and will include a specific question and answer period. However, you may queue up a question for us at any time today during today's presentation. You may enter a question simply by typing your question into the box on the lower left side of your screen and then click on the Send button. These instructions will be repeated later in the program. At this point, I would like to introduce our speaker for today's session, Don Ekenfelder. Don is past president and an ASSE fellow. He wrote the first BCSP Management Aspects exam. In New Zealand, Don Ekenfelder has been called safety's cultural ambassador. He has developed a way to quantify and codify culture so an organization can qualify everything it does. He has a history that involves reporting to the CEO of a Fortune 100 company and authoring many articles and a book that has been described as powerful and timely. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you Don Ekenfelder. Don, take it away, sir. It's all yours.
Thanks, Eric. As I contemplated doing this webinar today on a subject that's become near and dear to my heart over the last 15 years, as has been the feeling in my whole career that safety professionals were underpaid, underappreciated, underrecognized, and so forth, a story came to mind. It also reminds me of my daughter Jill, who has 6 boys, and this very well could have happened to her because most of them are pretty precocious. The story's about a lady who has a precocious youngster who's having an argument with her, and he's standing on the staircase in their house, and he's very agitated, as she is, and finally she seems to be winning the argument, and he says, well, I'm out of here. All of a sudden she can hear banging and slamming going on around upstairs, and she's heard a lot of this before, has a lot of boys, and so this is not strange to her, and he all of a sudden appears on the staircase with a suitcase in his hands, and she says to him, just exactly where do you think you're going? And he responds and says, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not allowed to cross the street by myself. I packed your suitcase. The story suggests that he's let some relatively minor restriction inhibit him from making a really major decision or having a major impact on his situation. I think that to a large degree that often is the case with safety professionals in general, and in particular with regard to the subject of culture. I think it's very important to us. We probably know as much or more about the subject as any other discipline, and we haven't been heard on the subject to anywhere near the degree we ought to. Recently I had the opportunity to be a part of the Economist Conference in New York City where there were 30 or 40 speakers, and I was the only safety person there, and virtually all the other speakers were better educated than I was. Probably almost everybody in the audience was, and I had the distinct feeling that I was the dumbest guy in the room. On the other hand, of 250 people and 30 people presenting ideas, several of whom were presidents of colleges and universities, like the president of NYU and Princeton University, I thought I had the best idea. And I wondered about why that was, and I think it's because of my safety background and the wide variety of people and circumstances that I've had an opportunity to be exposed to, and that helped lead me to where I am. And I think my objective in the webinar today is to get all of you to hopefully think more seriously about this subject, come up with new ideas yourself, and become a thought leader in your organizations with regard to this subject. Now, I'm going to start out with just summarizing what I'm going to tell you, what I think the key points are, and then at the end we'll go back through these again. The first point is that culture predicts performance. Now, there's nothing shocking or new here. We all know this. When you go into a restaurant or a store or any kind of business or even somebody's home, you can feel the culture. You can feel the climate. And you can make a subjective judgment as to whether they're going to be successful and whether this is going to be a good experience for you or not. We all feel that. And does it have to do with the way they look at you, the way they look at each other, the atmosphere there, whether the housekeeping is good or not, or whatever? Obviously, all of those things. So I never have much trouble getting people to agree to this point. Culture does predict performance. Okay. Second point is culture can be measured and managed. This one often have problems with. And when you first say this, people have sort of a distant look in their eyes when you're talking to them, as if to say, yeah, I don't think so. That's what we're going to go about doing here today, is indicating that, yeah, you actually can measure it. As Peter Drucker said, if you can't measure, you can't manage. We've heard the homily, what gets measured gets done. There's the other homily of medicine can become poison without measure. We all understand those things. We all understand the importance of measurement. And basically, this is what got me into what I'm going to be sharing with you today. Working with operations people, if you can't show them how they can measure something, create an initial interest, that goes away pretty quickly if you can't show them how to measure it. And then the principles upon which what we're talking about are being based are really found in antiquity. There's very little really new information in terms of philosophy or background here. The primary thing that I'm going to talk to you about that's new is the measurement, which I think is so critical. And we'll talk more about some of the background and history that leads to what we're going to be discussing today. And key point, I think, I believe culture is the last and most important piece of the safety puzzle. Safety, loss prevention, loss resistance is a puzzle that we've all been working on. Very few people have achieved perfection in this area. We've made tremendous progress over the decades. But I think that of all the things that tends to lead us toward loss resistance, that the last, not the least important, but the last and most important piece of the safety puzzle is culture. Got a little cartoon here which suggests something that I think is really important, which is the whole concept of diagnosis. Here we see that the Schuler family all seem to have neck problems, which they may have been to the chiropractor for, they might be taking medication for, and so forth. And obviously nobody has figured out the solution to the problem yet, and the TV repairman gets it here. So I think maybe, to draw an analogy, maybe the safety people are the people who are going to solve the culture measurement and management problem. And it is a giant problem. As a matter of fact, I was just looking today at the article about the Dallas Cowboys and them firing their coach and hiring Garrett to be their new coach. And the headlines in the story were Cowboys want Garrett to change team's culture. And then Garrett, who's a graduate of Princeton University and a well-educated guy, says one of the things that we're going to focus on going forward is the process. And that's one of our mantras, that the process is the product. And the process is what's important, not necessarily the measurement, although measurement is important too. You need to be able to measure. Okay, the presentation today is really primarily a nuts and bolts presentation, which is going to discuss an actual case history, which can serve as a case study of the application of culture measurement in an organization. And there's a whole bunch of activities and a sequence of activities that you need to go through in order to measure and manage safety culture and general culture in an organization. get buy-in, and have it actually produce the desired result. And so a good part of this presentation will be a recounting of the nuts and bolts of how you go about doing that. And then we'll spend a little time talking about the philosophy behind it and the actual tools. First, you've got to get to tell your story. In my case, this came as a result of an article in a concrete magazine that a human resource professional saw, called me, asked me if I did this, asked me if I'd come and talk to the owner and CEO of a 1,000-employee, $200 million aluminum extruding company an hour away from my home. I went, and within 15 minutes, the owner, second-generation owner of this family-owned company, realized that I was talking about exactly what he wanted to hear. So in this case, that was pretty easy. I got to tell my story, and it was accepted quickly. We'll talk a little more about how you in your individual organizations sell the fact that culture is important, and that maybe you're the person who has some of the best answers and can be of the most assistance in applying this methodology. Then you have to win over the decision maker, whoever that is, or whoever they are. And in this particular case, I was fortunate to start with the owner, and once he said, yeah, let's do this, it got real easy after that. The next step is always to find somebody inside the organization. In my case, as a consultant on the outside, I needed somebody inside. If you're working in a company already and you are inside, you're probably in a staff position, and you need to have somebody in the operations area who is going to be your supporter and help you implement the things that we're going to be talking about. Then it's important to identify champions. And those champions may be people who are titled, and they may not be. They may be people who other people simply look up to and tend to follow. Those people need to be identified, and then they have to be won over and educated. I'll talk more about how that happened at Keymark, but I think winning over and educating champions to the methodology and efficacy of culture measurement management is essential. Then it's necessary to get into educating associates or all employees and winning them over. Then, in terms of the measuring process, you've got to collect data. And we'll talk more about a lot more about how that's done and what the background and format should be for that. Then, of course, analyzing the results. What does the data collection mean? And we'll talk more about that, the culture profile, and how to evaluate and respond to that. You've got to provide feedback. And when people are asked to fill out a scorecard and they submit that, they have a natural curiosity. It's okay, what were the results and what are we going to do about it? This is a process where it's highly desirable to involve everyone. And champions need to be empowered so that they can carry the ball. And at that point, it's a pretty good idea to expand the scope of what you're doing and demonstrate the scalability. This methodology doesn't just work for safety. It works for everything. And it doesn't just work for enterprise.